Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Another Place You've Never Been by Rebecca Kauffman, narrated by Callie Beaulieu. Prologue. 1,000 Voices. The North Dakota plain was as flat and yellow as a cornmeal pancake, dotted with small gleaming ranch homes and dusty vehicles. The reservation was too quiet and too hot. It was August. Two brothers went to a swimming hole. The older brother rode their bicycle, and the younger brother balanced on the handlebars. The swimming hole was several miles from their home, a single-wide periwinkle trailer that sat at the easternmost border of Sunflower Gates Motorhome Park. The brothers rode past the sprawling wheat mill and processing plant that overlooked Sunflower Gates and into town. Past the St. Francis Mission, the IGA, Twin Bear Liquor Store, the tire place on Thief River Road, and their cousin Sonny's home, where his girlfriend sipped an orange soda and waved to them from the porch. They rode past fields of wheat and hay and sugar beets. When they reached the swimming hole, they took all of their clothing off and hung it in the branches of a white willow tree. Their bodies were sun-browned, their hair gleaming like black liquid gold. The younger brother sang loudly and beautifully. The water was warm and thin and dark. The brothers somersaulted and grabbed at frogs in the shallow end. They dove into the deep end from a bouncing piece of oak that jutted out from a small, groaning wooden platform. They tossed handfuls of pond muck at one another. The older brother noticed a school of mid-sized bluegills, and he left the water to retrieve the long-handled net they had brought for this purpose. When he returned to the pond, he didn't see the younger brother. The older brother walked along the edge of the pond, through crisp reeds and tall cattails whose fluffy innards oozed from their pods. He gazed out across the far side of the pond to see if his brother had perhaps gotten out and dried off. He watched the surface of the water for bubbles or a series of circles that would indicate his brother's whereabouts. He had always worried about the younger brother, who was reckless and unafraid. He called the younger brother's name. Finally, the younger brother burst from the water's surface at the far end of the pond, the deep end, and he was gasping. He swam frantically and with poor form to the edge of the pond where he scrambled out. The older brother ran to him. The younger brother sat and coughed and coughed. The older brother sat with him. The younger brother examined his feet and ankles, which were speckled with tiny spots of red. He said, "Don't go back in the water." The older brother said, "What's down there?" He was very afraid. "Barbed wire." The younger brother rose and said, "Let's go home." The younger brother said he'd like to ride the bicycle home, reminding the older brother that it was his turn and insisting that he was fine. Before mounting the bicycle, the younger brother ran his T-shirt over his feet and ankles, which were still bleeding slowly but steadily, and appeared a bit swollen. The older brother climbed onto the handlebars of the bike. They hadn't yet reached town when the front wheel of the bike took a sharp turn, waggling first, then nosing directly into the ground, and the older brother stumbled headfirst onto the shoulder of the dirt road. The older brother leapt to his feet and went to his younger brother, who now lay quietly at the side of the road, with the bicycle still between his legs. The older brother shook the younger brother's shoulder and said his name over and over. But the younger brother was cold and dead. The men of the community drained the pond the next day, and where the younger brother had been tangled beneath the surface, they found not barbed wire, but a nest of venomous water moccasin snakes. This breed was thought to live exclusively in the southeast. Never before had a sighting been reported north of the state of Virginia. Perplexed and aggrieved, the men used shovels and hoes to chop the snakes to pieces, the bloody black parts wriggling in the dry grass long after their heads had been removed. The older brother lived to be elderly, and when he died, he was buried next to the younger brother in Grandfather Tree Cemetery beneath the white willows. On the day of his burial, after the crowd had dispersed, several astonished onlookers reported a sighting of the younger brother at his grave, and although he was recognizable for his strong features and resemblance to the older brother, the younger brother had grown huge, aged, and transformed to a two-spirit in the underworld, witnesses claimed, for now he had the appearance of a female. The two-spirit quickly disappeared into the high grass of the wheat fields that day. But over time, reports from various locations corroborated this sighting. Elders collected these accounts and shared them with one another in attempts to identify her patterns and purpose. The two-spirit appeared as a female to some and a male to others, and it was not clear whether this was the result of any actual sort of transformation, or if it was simply a difference in the perception of the observer. It seemed that oftentimes, but not always, the two-spirit appeared to those for whom death was near, and they believed that the two-spirit had healing powers, but did not always choose to use them. They said that people feared the two-spirit, although no one knew of any violence he/she had committed. He/she often traveled alongside water, they noted, and they speculated that perhaps he/she passed to and from the underworld by the way of the sea. Many years later, young Ojibwe children asked the elders about the strange dry pit carved from the North Dakota plain, out beyond the wheat and hay and sugar beet fields, where there are still remains of the diving board platform at the east end, splintered oak with stray, rusted nails. Within the pit, there can be found a half-buried shoe, some fishing line, a flat, floppy basketball yellowed by the sun. The elders tell them the story of the brothers. Unlike the stories they're accustomed to being told, the children don't know what to make of this one. Oftentimes, they will go home and ask their parents to retell the story. Then the children will retell the story to one another. They feel something different in each retelling. They are learning that sometimes it takes 1,000 voices to tell one story. Me or the mouse? Marty was going on for the 5th time that day about how they'd have to cool it with the hard liquor once his daughter arrived. She was only 10 years old, but she wasn't some clueless idiot, he said, and he didn't want her reporting back to her mother that he was boozing and crashing all summer long. Besides, he was really hurting for cash, he continued, come to think of it. April hadn't paid for a thing in months. Not a single Q-tip. Not one slice of cheese. "Okay, Chief," April said. She was working an emery board over her thumbnail. Her little white Tupperware basket full of manicure supplies sat on the coffee table in front of her. She finished with the file and ran her fingers through the white basket, the small glass bottles of polish clicking against one another like dice. She settled on navy with silver glitter and smacked the bottle against her palm before starting to apply it. "Love that shade, babe," Marty said from the lazy boy. He pulled hard and noisy on his cigarette before exhaling, using his lips to direct it in a sharp angle toward the open window. Marty had soft, thick lips and nice eyes, but teeth that were splayed out like they'd been hit hard from the inside. April was out of his league, looks-wise, but Marty was a real decent guy. He gave her a hard time about money sometimes, but he was never serious. The armrests of his lazy boy were worn to strings, exposing bulges of mustard-colored stuffing which he pinched absently. He wore a camouflage baseball cap over knotty, shoulder-length hair. "Did you remember to get them air freshener things?" he said. April nodded toward the plastic bag at the foot of the couch. "Did you get different flavors?" "Mm-hmm." She didn't look up from her nails. "Babe?" he said. "Yes, I got friggin' vanilla, ocean mist, mountain something or other." Marty was so annoying lately. Ever since it had been decided that his daughter would spend the summer with him, he'd been on his high horse about getting the place clean, sobering up, smoking out the window, color-coded trash bins. He'd spent the last month trying to convince April that this would be good for the two of them, too. getting their act together a little bit, healthier lifestyle, looking after a kid, etc. Not likely, April thought. She wasn't much for recycling, etc. April finished her nails and went to the kitchen. She tossed 2 burritos wrapped in foil onto a baking sheet and turned on the oven. She stared at her reflection in the toaster while the oven ticked and hummed like it was changing gears. She ran her fingers tight through her bangs to check the status of her roots. She bleached her hair every 3 weeks to keep it white blonde and blow-dried it upside down every morning, then made it even bigger with mousse and a wide-tooth comb. Even with all that volume, it fell past her shoulder blades. She had a great head of hair. People said so all the time. She hadn't had it short since the 1st grade. She brushed some cigarette ash from her thighs. She was wearing denim capris and a denim snap-up shirt. She was also wearing her white vinyl high heels, and they were sexy as hell, even with the bright green grass scuffs that crisscrossed the sides. She couldn't believe the footwear most women her age wore out in public. It was no wonder married men were always after her. She took Marty his burrito and a Budweiser. "The Last Supper, huh?" he said, thumbing the hot foil, "before it's hot dogs and apple juice for 2 months. April looked at him warily through half eyes. "We'll see," she said. "We're going to get on fine," Marty said brightly. He lifted his burrito up with both hands, spilling some of the contents onto his lap. "Mouse is a good kid." "How do you know what kind of kid she is? You haven't seen her in years." "Lay off, would you? Sound like my ex." He made a talking puppet with his hand and spoke in his falsetto. "Moi, moi, ma, ma, ma." "What time does she get in?" Marty picked a bean off his crotch and tossed it into his mouth. 4:08. "You gonna come along for the pickup?" "You know I hate airports, Marty, and Traverse City. Can't stand the way those people drive." Marty sighed and peered out the window. It was a quiet, purple dusk. "Anyway," he said, "I'm gonna go see if I can get any bites." He went to the kitchen and returned with the last 2 beers still dangling from their plastic netting. He loosened one of them and gave it to April. In his other hand, he held a little tin of black soil that was teeming with night crawlers. He had 3 or 4 of these tins, which he kept in the produce drawer of the refrigerator. Monk Pond was a swampy, stinking thing that stretched a half-mile or so across. Ownership was technically shared by the 2 or 3 dozen houses and trailers that surrounded it, but Marty was one of only 2 residents who actually had a boat and spent any time on the water. The other was an old nut named Forrest, who walked around the pond once each day. If you were unlucky enough to be out in your yard when he passed, he'd invite himself on over and talk your ear off about the Second Amendment or his part-time job at the antique mall. Forrest was personally into some weird stuff. Old Barbie collectibles, torture devices from movie sets, real human baby parts in jars of formaldehyde. Marty's little aqua blue rowboat was littered with duct tape patches, and its scratched-up oars were different lengths. The boat's interior was splintery and stained with fish blood and who knew what else. April wouldn't set foot in the thing. She stood at the window and watched him drag the boat from the backyard into the water by a thin gray rope. Then he rowed out a short ways. He lit a cigarette and laid back in the boat, a single hand balancing the fishing pole across his chest. Marty claimed to have caught a 40-pound tiger muskie several years ago, up on Lake Superior. Said he took it to a taxidermist and everything, but then wasn't able to get it across the border, back into the States. Something about customs regulations. He'd returned it to the taxidermist for safekeeping, promised he'd be back for it. His passport had since expired, and he hadn't bothered to go retrieve the thing. April was skeptical about the whole story. No photographs, no witnesses. The moon was like a see-through communion wafer against the dark blue sky. Dragonflies skirted through the reeds, and a turtle's head appeared at the water's surface, then quickly dipped beneath. Yellow lights twinkled across the pond. April watched Marty ease himself lower in the boat until all she could see of him was the gentle, pulsing column of cigarette smoke against the black water. The mouse walked in through the kitchen screen door, and it banged like a shot behind her. She was bigger than April had expected a 10-year-old would be. She was a smug-looking thing with dark, wild hair and one arched eyebrow. She looked nothing like Marty. April wondered if that was a sure thing. April was sitting on the kitchen counter with a magazine across her lap. She stubbed out her cigarette. "Hola," said the mouse. April slid off the counter. "Is that all you have?" The mouse was wearing a ratty pink backpack over one shoulder, and she tapped a little silver pocketbook against her thigh. "No. Marty's got my suitcase. My mom said I don't have to call him Dad unless I want to." April shrugged. "Well, my name's April, but you can call me whatever you want, so long as it's not a B word or a C word." The mouse stared at her. "Anyway," April said, "you want me to call you Mouse like your dad does?" "Whatever," the mouse said. "Or Tracy. I don't care. I really do not care." The mouse stood on her tiptoes to investigate the wooden duck that rested on the fireplace mantel. She grabbed it by the bill with her fist. "This is heavy," she said. The duck was missing one of its black marble eyeballs, and the mouse dug a little bit at the remaining one with her fingertips. April made sandwiches for the three of them. The mouse wolfed down her peanut butter and jelly and asked why the milk tasted like water. "It's skim," April said. "Oh, I'm used to 2%. "Next time," Marty said. "Skim is better if you want to keep your figure," April said. Marty was nervous, chewing fast and making bad jokes and asking the mouse a lot of questions. He had a crack in the corner of his lip, and it twinkled with fresh blood. The mouse didn't like school, had never skied, and she didn't have a boyfriend. Gross. She told them about the solar eclipse she and her classmates had watched out in the schoolyard several months earlier. She seemed to think that was a really big deal. She wanted to be on TV when she grew up. "By the way, is your TV in color?" she asked. Marty shook his head. "Why? Is yours?" "No," the mouse said. "I just thought maybe you would have one. Shelley's got a color TV." She got up from the table and opened the cupboard beneath the TV. She pulled out a stack of hunting magazines and a doorknob, and a deck of playing cards with a silhouetted man in a cowboy hat on the box and the back of each card. "Hey, Marty," she said, "why was 6 afraid of 7? April had heard this one from some guy at a bar. "Because 7, 8, 9, she cut in. The mouse scowled at her. Marty laughed. "You know any more?" "Maybe," the mouse said, with a measure of coolness. She pointed out the window. "Are them geese?" Marty followed her finger and nodded. "They nested on the pond. Been here all spring." "Look at the babies," she said, pointing again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. "Can we feed 'em?" She gripped the windowsill with both hands and balanced on one foot with the other one propped up at the knee, like a flamingo. Her flip-flops were translucent purple. Marty turned to April. "Have we got some store bread, hun?" April said, "That's supposed to be for us, but sure, give them a piece or two." She gave Marty the remaining half loaf of bread. The mouse retrieved her rain boots from her suitcase and sashayed out to wade in the water. April rinsed their plates, and once Marty had left, she snuck a swig from the handle of whiskey she'd stowed under the sink behind the cleaning supplies. She watched an episode of Flo that she'd seen before. Marty and Mouse were still chattering away out back when the show was over, and when April looked out the window, she saw that he was steadying the rowboat for the mouse as she crawled in. They rowed out to the center of the pond. Marty had left the empty plastic bread bag on the lawn, and a mild wind dragged it slowly, somersaulting across the backyard. They called Marty's place a 2-bedroom, but that was a stretch. Both bedrooms were tiny, one 7 by 7 and the other 8 by 8, and both bordered the living room, which opened to the kitchen. All the walls were paper thin. The burnt orange carpeting was worn down bald and didn't absorb any noise, nor did any of the threadbare upholstery. The mouse talked loudly in her sleep, and she was up at 7 a.m. on the nose every morning, stirring around in the bathroom, then clattering through the refrigerator. Sometimes she went outdoors first thing in the morning to putter around the lawn and into the pond in her boots to feed the geese if they were nearby. She never eased the screen door shut behind her, no matter what time of day. She let it swing free to crash violently behind her. April didn't trust the mouse. She was sneaky. She ate too much. They went through a box of Apple Jacks in 3 days. She always had that one-eyed, "Is that so?" look on her face, and she was seldom fully clothed. She scampered around in shorts and a yellow bikini top with triangles the size of sugar packets over her flat chest. Marty, on the other hand, was really getting into this parenting thing. He was still on disability, so he had all the time in the world for the mouse. He took her to the park and to lunch at Arby's and for cherry lime rickeys at the ice cream place. He took her all the way to the Cherry Hut, a 45-minute drive each way, for just one piece of pie. He taught her some silly song about a little man who lived on a red moon, and they sang that song day in and day out. The mouse was completely tone-deaf, which April pointed out to Marty one time, and he said, "Your point being?" He took the mouse out fishing in the evening while April drank whiskeys and changed the color of her nails. When the mouse caught her first fish, Marty made April get the camera to take a picture of the little thing while it was still alive, wiggling and glittering on the hook. The mouse didn't even flinch when Marty beheaded and filleted it on the back porch. April thought that was a little sick. Later that night, April went to the Blue Slipper and stayed there until last call. Men bought her drinks all night long. She didn't spend a dime. Marty didn't even notice that April was out past 2 a.m. He was fast asleep when she crawled into bed, snoring like a hog and unresponsive when she started rubbing up on him. April half wished there had been some new men in town, someone else she could start up with if Marty wasn't going to give a hoot. Marty was the nicest guy she'd ever been with by a long shot, and they'd been together for almost 3 years now. But it's not like she didn't have other options. Men were always trying to start up with her. Unfortunately, at the Blue Slipper, it was just the same olds. The next afternoon, April applied tanning oil, and Marty drove the 3 of them out to Lake Michigan. There were only a few others on the beach, a couple dozen people perhaps, if that, and April wished she had more of an audience for her new bikini. The mouse was positively giddy on this beach, like she'd never set foot on sand before, never seen a gull or held a shell in her hand. April watched as the 2 of them pounced into the waves. When they returned, they were deep in conversation, and April overheard enough to discover that the mouse didn't know how to swim. Not very well, anyway. She could keep her head above water, but had never been properly trained and couldn't stay up for any amount of time or go any amount of distance. Already she had spent lots of time in Monk Pond, and now that April thought about it, she realized she'd never seen the mouse go out past waist deep. Marty was saying, "Don't worry, mouse. I'll give you lessons back in the pond. It's too choppy out here to get a good session in. I had no idea you didn't know how to swim. Would have thought someone had taught you by now." April said, "Crazy that you don't know how to swim for as much time as you spend in the water. Guess you must be a starfish, huh?" The mouse looked up at her. "Why a starfish?" "They're the only fish that can't swim," April explained. Marty gave April an unpleasant look and quickly interjected. "But," he said, lifting a wise finger to the mouse, "starfish are special. When they lose one of their legs, they up and grow it right back." The mouse seemed satisfied with this information. April formulated a snide joke about a new leg just being more dead weight, being as the thing still couldn't swim, but she didn't share this aloud. The following morning, the mouse burst into their bedroom with a fistful of stale bread. "One of 'em disappeared," she cried. She was panting. She set down the bread and dropped her hands to her knees to catch her breath. Marty threw the blanket over April, even though she was wearing a t-shirt. "It's true," the mouse said. She was in her rain boots and navy mesh shorts and a yellow bikini top. She was wearing one of Marty's baseball caps with the plastic snap panel in the back adjusted to fit her, but the bill stretched beyond her little head in both directions, and it was so low on her brow that she had to tilt her head back to see out from under it. "I was feeding 'em, and then all of a sudden there's a little shwoop, and this little goose gets sucked under the water, and just like that," the mouse snapped her fingers, "it just disappears." She paused for a moment, allowing them to react, then continued. "So then the other little geese looked at it where it had been, and there's just some ripples in the water." "Mouse?" Marty propped himself up on his elbow to face her. "Relax. I think it was your imagination. It was probably just lagging." "No," she insisted. "I always count 'em when they come over, and there was 7 when they came, 7 babies and the mama. And then I counted 'em again and again to make sure, and I swear there's only 6. The mouse stared hard at April for a moment and said, "You look really different in the morning." She turned back to Marty. "What should we do?" "You steer clear of the pond, Mouse," he said. "I'll check it out later." That evening, when the geese returned for their routine nightly feeding, sure enough, Marty reported to April there were only 6 goslings. "Strangest thing," he said. The mouse, vindicated, nodded empathetically at Marty's side. Her eyes shone bright and exultant under the porch light, which was swarming with moths and mosquitoes and mayflies. Marty spat on the ground in a tight, practiced stream. "Yeah," April said dramatically, "so strange. I can't even imagine." The mouse swatted at a mayfly and said, "These things have a life expectancy of 1 day. Do you know how many eggs they lay in 1 day?" 10, April said. 8,000, said the mouse. "My dad told me that." The mouse had a bad dream that night about a pond monster, and Marty had to go hold her to calm her down. When he came back to bed, April tickled up his thigh with her fingers. He edged away from her. "So, are we just not going to do it until August? I got needs, Marty." "We can do it quiet," he said, patting her hand. "Just not tonight. I'm tuckered." April got up and poured herself a coffee cup full of whiskey and watched the TV on mute until the mouse came out of her bedroom. Her hair was matted flat against one side of her head and her face was pink, her eyes shrunken with sleep. Nightgown bunched in her fists. She pointed at the TV and said, "That flashing light's bugging me under the door." April was too drunk to argue, and she wasn't really following the program she was watching anyway, so she turned the TV off and went to bed. The very next morning, the mouse came charging into their bedroom again. "Cheese," Marty grunted. "We knock here, compadre. Remember?" "I saw it," she said, breathless and clutching her chest. "Saw what?" "The monster," the mouse whispered in utter terror as though it might overhear. "This long." She stretched her arms out as wide as she could in both directions. "Its head is like this." She made a coconut-sized ball with her hands. "And teeth?" She bared and snapped her own teeth. "It was slithering around like a snake in our yard. Then it disappeared into the water." "Right," April said. "A pond monster in our own backyard." She had a roaring headache, and she was so nauseous that their hard, flat mattress felt like a quivering waterbed beneath her. Marty said, "I don't think so, Mouse. I'm out there every day. No monsters." The mouse stomped one of her boots. It was still soaking wet, and a thin Kelly...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?